This episode of New Politics was released on the 5th of April, 2025, and produced on the lands of the Wangal and Gadigal people.
And welcome to our audience, and welcome to you, David. We are all just getting into the mood of the election campaign, and I tried to find out who I am on the ABC's Vote Compass, and that's the interactive survey that comes out at election time where you can see who you are on the political spectrum. And David, I'm still to the left of Fidel Castro.
That's good. I haven't done it for a little while. Last time I ended up in a bizarre spot where I was sort of right over to the left, except for a couple of key things where I was right over to the centre.
Well, centre-left is a good spot to be.
Centre-left's not a bad place to be. It's all the nicest people, all the best people. I'm getting all Trump here. I think it's a really good idea. And what I do like about it is that it allows for the fact that we're not strictly binary left or right, that there are shades and nuances and opinions that might have seemed contradictory 30 years ago, but in fact today are quite consistent with each other. I don't know that it quite works as well, but points for trying. And these things tend to improve over time anyway as they learn more. What did you think, Eddie?
I think it's quite an interesting tool. I think it might be a little bit rigged in some ways, but there's a lot of voting compasses out there anyway, in Australia and overseas as well. So I think it's just a good idea to have a look at some of these and check out the interactors and see where you stand politically. It's always good to know who you are.
That's right. If you don't know what your opinions are, you can go and find out.
And there's a lot coming up in this episode. We look at the big issues in the first week of the election campaign. We talk about tariffs. We assess the latest opinion polls. And we also talk to Ellie Smith. She's the community independent backed by the Climate 200 group, and she's taking on Peter Dutton in the seat of Dickson. So we find out what's going on there. And David, 1 week of the campaign is over and there's just 4 more weeks to go.
It's been a quiet campaign, and I'm wondering if that's because the Dutton-led Liberal Party has already made a hash of it. Among other things, he accused the Prime Minister and the Greens of having a political agenda in an election campaign. Shoot me down in flames. I thought that that's what a political campaign was about, but apparently not.
And just a reminder that New Politics is produced by independent media. You can listen in, share, subscribe and support New Politics at Patreon and Substack. It's just $5 per month. Or you can donate directly at our website at newpolitics.com.au. And of course, all of this is a good way to support independent journalism.
Here it is. Here it is. Here it is. Here it is.
So it's the completion of the first full week of the election campaign, and there's a wide range of issues that are being discussed, and not many of these have got direct relevance to anything at all at the moment. It's not quite a ship in the harbour, but there was a massive level of hysteria and panic about a Chinese research ship that was in international waters in the Southern Ocean and going through the waters between Victoria and Tasmania. The Prime Minister, Anthony Albanese, said that he wished that the ship was not there at all, and then Peter Dutton started the outrage by saying that the Prime Minister has lost control of national security and then told a complete lie that this ship was gathering intelligence from Australia.
It is unbelievable that the Prime Minister can't explain to the Australian people what is happening here. Of course there's a collection of intelligence, and of course there is a mapping of undersea cable. Australia is an island nation, and we require the connectivity to the rest of the world. Our internet, the way in which we communicate with our partners, with our allies and with the rest of the world is contingent on those cables. And yet the Prime Minister of our country can't stand up and be honest with the Australian public.
And all of a sudden in the media, this research ship became a Chinese spy ship, and the media whipped up a frenzy about sabotage and espionage and asked this of the Prime Minister.
So on this research vessel, it's come back for a second time. Do you know do you know what it is researching? What have you done to protect our undersea cables from any monitoring or sabotage? And have you communicated anything to the Chinese government about this?
Yeah, what we have done is we're continuing to monitor it. We won't, for obvious reasons, broadcast everything that we're doing, but we're keeping an eye on this as we do.
But what does keeping an eye mean?
As we do,
Have you sent defence? What does monitoring actually mean?
What it means is that the Australian Defence Force are monitoring what is happening. It's going from New Zealand. We expect it to go around to China, around that way.
And do you have concerns about it, Mr Albanese?
Here you go.
Do you have concerns
of course
about what it's doing?
I would prefer that it wasn't there.
Yeah.
But we live in circumstances where just as Australia has vessels in the South China Sea and vessels in the Taiwan Strait and a range of areas, this vessel is there. What our task is to do is to make sure that we represent Australia's national interests. We do that each and every day, and I have every confidence in our Defence Force and our security agencies to do just that.
And of course, it would have been much better if Albanese had just come out and said, look, China is a very good trading partner with Australia and has a very good relationship with Australia. It's a research vessel in international waters as part of a joint project with the New Zealand government. And I think if he had have come out and said this, well, this probably would have been the end of this as an issue. But I think that by saying, I wish it wasn't there, I think it just added to the hysteria, which Peter Dutton was only happy to add to. Probably wouldn't have made any difference what Anthony Albanese had have said. I think Peter Dutton would have ramped this up on some level. So we've had this kind of bluff and bluster during the week, none of which really matters to anyone, but it just goes to show, well, this particular incident, I just think it goes to show how small-minded this country can be sometimes.
Yeah, and the fact that it was with New Zealand, that's all the Prime Minister had to say. Look, it was a joint exercise with our closest allies, our closest friends, our family, New Zealand. And if New Zealand trusts them, then we trust them. And he could bring in the Five Eyes, would let us know if there was anything wrong, to both enrage and satiate the conspiracy theorists. It was Dutton trying to set the agenda, knowing that for some reason the Liberal Party is perceived as having a better record on national security. Now, when you look at it, they've got a terrible record. They let in more criminals. They lead us into more wars that we shouldn't have anything to do with. Our good ambassadors spend a lot of time having to fix the damage of coalition brain melts about various countries. But Dutton, knowing that the Liberal Party tend to poll well on issues of national security, is trying it. I think the issue will go away because ultimately it's international waters, and eventually someone closer to the source than us is going to point out it's in international waters. You can't do anything, and without any kind of evidence that they're spying. And it's very hard to spy from international waters, although not as hard as it used to be. It's a non-issue.
Well, these sorts of incidents, I think you're right. I don't think it will define the election outcome, and I'm sure that there'll be a lot of scouring of shipping lines over the next few weeks to see if there can be a scare campaign of any other Chinese vessel, and they'll probably hit the jackpot if there's a Russian vessel out there somewhere as well. But I think Australia likes to see itself as some kind of middle power, the king of the Pacific region, but I think it really has to decide whether it is or whether it isn't. And this sort of idiocy, well, it's always promoted by the Liberal Party and fully supported by the mainstream media. It's like this stupid backwater with all these old racist tropes about Chinese invasion. It's like this little paranoid country that this tiny little research boat is somehow going to ruin our way of life, and all of our top secrets are going to be stolen, our internet is going to be stolen, all of these bad things are going to happen. And it's pretty much the same with asylum seekers. If there's one or two people that come in from Indonesia in a tiny little dinghy, that it's somehow a threat to our national security. And I just wish that people would grow up about this sort of stuff. And as you pointed out, David, national security is perceived as a coalition strong point. So, of course, this is what they're trying to ramp up. All this hysteria about this tiny little research boat, the paranoia. Dutton keeps going on about communist China. And this is obviously a deliberate point that he's forcing and making up. But someone should tell him that it's 2025 and it's not the 1960s. The Cold War is over. That finished some time ago, and we should have all moved on from this.
And technically we won the Cold War, so, let it go. I'm waiting for the racist headlines. Malbanese, Maobanese, and things like that.
My point is that we should be much better than this. And, within the media, within the political system, there's just this duplicity of outrage about all of this, and we should have moved on from this a long, long time ago.
Yeah, we've generally got a good relationship with China, and yes, China has human rights issues, it's got legal issues, it's got governmental issues that need to be addressed in some kind of way. But it's also our second biggest trading partner. We have a lot of very strong cultural ties with China, with Chinese immigration in this country here from about the 1820s, and people of Chinese descent. Their families being here a lot longer than a lot of the people telling them to go home. There's a lot of work to do to maintain those relationships and to improve those relationships. And that works both ways. As I said, the treatment of various minorities in China and political dissidents and things like that is something that Australia should be pressing more on. And perhaps they are behind the scenes. But yeah, we're at the point where it's just embarrassing when the press comes out and starts blowing dog whistles and sometimes just normal whistles about the threat from China, trademark, copyright, and the red peril. And I think it was Tim Flannery, I saw him in a speech once, and he said the Chinese people have been in their area for thousands of years, and they've known about Australia since at least 1788, probably a bit before, and they've never come down because there's no reason to come down. And I think that's absolutely correct.
Well, I guess all this sort of stuff is going to come up during an election campaign. And another issue that arose during the week was the location of where the Prime Minister would live. This also became a big talking point during the week, and that's when the Leader of the Opposition said that he and his family would live in Kirribilli rather than the official residence at the Lodge in Canberra if he became Prime Minister.
We would live in Kirribilli. It's we love Sydney and love the harbour. It's a great city, and so yes, that's the answer. You've got a choice between Kirribilli or living in Canberra,
Right.
Canberra and the Lodge.
And
I think it takes Sydney any day over Canberra.
because we
And Peter Dutton managed to annoy the people of Sydney by threatening to live there and upset the people of Canberra at the same time by having a go at them. And this ticks all the wrong boxes for an aspiring leader. Taking a potshot at the people living in Canberra, being choosy about which house you're going to live in during the time of a housing crisis, and already assuming that you were going to become the Prime Minister. Here's the actual Prime Minister, Anthony Albanese, in response.
Now, we had an announcement yesterday from Peter Dutton that this Queenslander is going to be the Prime Minister for Sydney as well. Because there he is, measuring out the curtains at Kirribilli. I'll give him the tip. Working from home is what he says he's against. Well, the office is in Canberra. Parliament House is in Canberra. I live in Canberra. You were all at the Lodge on Saturday night, just to out you all. You were all there on Saturday night at the Prime Minister's residence, and it was in Canberra, not in Sydney.
Anthony Albanese also added that Peter Dutton is already measuring up the curtains at Kirribilli House, but he also mentioned that you should never take the electorate for granted, and that's absolutely correct. And ultimately, well, what difference will this make? But the electorate doesn't like to see arrogance or to be taken for granted, and I think Peter Dutton made a mistake here.
He made an absolute mistake. After Morrison, Howard, and I can't remember if Turnbull lived in Kirribilli or if he did actually go to Canberra.
Well, he had his own version of Kirribilli on the other side of the harbour.
That's true, yeah. But John Howard should never have chosen Sydney to live in. Now, to be extremely fair, his electorate was in Sydney, so it made sense that he would live there. You could argue the same for Morrison, but they put in the specious argument of, their children are at school in Sydney. Lots of people move and lots of children go to different schools. They're fans of the private system. They could have sent their kids to boarding school. Canberra is where the government is. Canberra is still where nearly all of the head offices are. I know Barnaby Joyce tried moving agriculture, I think, to Armidale. It was a total disaster and debacle. They spent more money on travelling back to Canberra to attend various meetings. And in fact, they were using the local McDonald's for the Wi-Fi because it was so badly organised. It took 3 months to set the computers up in the office. And of course, McDonald's servers are not particularly secure. So
I actually like Canberra. I don't know why politicians are dissing on Canberra. It's actually a good city.
Yeah, I'm going down in a couple of weeks, I think, to the folk festival down there, which I do most Easters. I've spent a lot of time in Canberra researching in the National Archives and the National Library. There's plenty worse places in New South Wales, even. And if you've got a politician's travel allowance, it's well within range of Sydney, it's well within range of Melbourne, and the Prime Minister should be available. We shouldn't have to uproot everything to be in Sydney part-time because a Brisbane-based Prime Minister, which is never going to happen, by the way, but, would prefer to live in Sydney rather than, as I said, there were arguments for Morrison with his young children and Howard with his then fairly young children. But as specious as those arguments were, there was an argument. There's none for a Queensland Prime Minister. And it's almost as if he wants to lose this election.
Well, essentially something like this is not a big issue, but for me, because we're always trying to look at the little things that make a big difference within an election campaign, and for me it gets back to that issue of the lack of discipline and maybe a lack of preparation by the Liberal Party, and certainly at least it shows a lack of attention to detail. And we criticised Anthony Albanese in the lead up to the last election for not having that attention to detail. It didn't make any difference to his election result. He ended up becoming the Prime Minister, but there are more important matters to talk about, and the Minister for Industry, Ed Husich, probably put it across in the best way.
Well, you go to one Justin Ham's fundraiser in the harbour and suddenly you're thinking about moving to Kirribilli. Jokes aside, you know what? I don't really give a heck, I had to check my language, about where either of these two fellas live. The bigger thing is we got to build more homes. And the issue I've got with the coalition is they're talking about one home that one person wants to get into while they don't have a policy to build more homes. And the reality is if we want to make housing more affordable in this country, build more homes. Right. Let's have that debate rather than talking about if it's Kirribilli or Canberra.
But I think the other factor is that it does work itself into other issues which can be easily exploited politically. Peter Dutton did announce that he wants to end public servants from working from home, but the biggest public servant of all is not going to practice what he preaches. And he's decided that if he becomes the top public servant in Australia, that he is going to work from home. And it's the double standard that the electorate doesn't really like. And then there's all this other stuff that's coming out as well, and all of it is very predictable. Peter Dutton is now saying that the education department is too woke and it's indoctrinating children, and he was also questioning, well, why do we need a federal education department, and maybe that should be cut as well. And I'm thinking, well, where have I heard this before? Maybe from Donald Trump or somewhere like that. And it was just such predictable rubbish. And Senator Bridget McKenzie decided that she too would lap up this garbage on education, speaking about this indoctrination stuff without really explaining anything about it.
Well, I'm an ex-chalky myself, and the sense of responsibility as a teacher, no matter what age child you are actually teaching, is very serious. What you say as a teacher within the classroom, the types of information you give your students, the types of information and opinions you choose not to share with your students is important. And increasingly what we've been seeing in the classroom is that certain ideas and perspectives are privileged over other ideas or
like
contradictory
what
ideas.
This is what I'm trying to get to the heart of. Like, what are they?
Students were actually not encouraged to bring certain political commentary into the classroom for discussion in an English class because it was deemed as anti-climate change or anti-environment.
Now, I don't think many people actually know what a chalky is, and I don't know when chalk was last used in a classroom, but this is just total crap being pushed onto the public, and this is an Australian-style Trumpism, cut everything. Why do we need education? Let's cut that as well. Let's cut funding for train projects. Let's cut the ABC. It's all this imported Doge rubbish from Elon Musk. And I think the coalition will keep pushing this and keep trying this during the election campaign, but I just don't think it's going to work.
They're not looking at the end. Elon Musk has apparently resigned from Doge because he's been a disaster. They've had to rehire back a lot of the people that they sacked. And there's a lot of court cases that are coming up, which even if they win, will be costly, inefficient, and a waste of everybody's time. Trump people don't like education because educated people tend not to vote for Trump, whereas uneducated people tend to vote for Trump. And Dutton is trying to push himself in this way, but he's not seeing the consequences of all this. And I don't just mean the horrid social consequences and political consequences, but the electoral consequences. They've just lost an election, a court election, in which Elon Musk was paying people to take a picture of themselves voting or going to vote for the Republican candidate, and he'd pay $20 or something if you did that. And they had a 10% swing against the incumbent Republican in a safe seat. So I think even if Australians aren't noticing that similar idea of we don't want this far right wing nonsense. We want a government that's effective, sure, but that provides services that are needed, that is there for when you're in trouble, gives the right kind of support at the right kind of time, funds its institutions properly and effectively. Not efficiently, if efficiency has failed, but effective, where you go to school, you get a good education. You may need extra support, financial or educational support or emotional support, but you should be able to do that. You go to the hospital, you should be able to get the level of care you require within a reasonable time frame, done by people who are well qualified. And to be fair, we do have that in Australia, but it's a balancing act, and it's not the same across all hospitals. For example, you should be able to have a police force or a law enforcement that is compassionate, fair, just, and unbiased, and paid well enough that corruption shouldn't be an issue, but not paid so well that they're, we don't want instant millionaires. It's probationary constables and things like that. We want courts that look at the evidence fairly. And this is what a Department of Government Efficiency should be doing. But instead, they're just going through, cutting things they don't like and shoveling the extra funds that they allegedly save into the pockets of people who don't need it.
In a few moments, I will sign a historic executive order instituting reciprocal tariffs on countries throughout the world. Reciprocal, that means they do it to us and we do it to them. Very simple, can't get any simpler than that.
And during the week, the United States announced a 10% tariff on Australian imports, and this will play out in the campaign in the style of, I guess, the government saying that it did everything possible to avoid a tariff, and it is the lowest tariff applied to any country. In some countries do have a tariff of 49% applied to them, and then the opposition will try to keep pointing out that they would have been able to get an exemption even though nobody else has been able to do that. Here's the Prime Minister, Anthony Albanese, responding to this decision.
The unilateral action that the Trump administration has taken today against every nation in the world does not come as a surprise. For Australia, these tariffs are not unexpected, but let me be clear, they are totally unwarranted. President Trump referred to reciprocal tariffs. A reciprocal tariff would be zero, not 10%. The administration's tariffs have no basis in logic, and they go against the basis of our two nations partnership. This is not the act of a friend.
And this is going to play out politically in Australia over the next 4 weeks, not economically, because the economic impact will take a much longer time to come into effect, both here and in the United States. But Labor will try to play it down during the election campaign, and the Liberals will try to ramp it up, I'd say.
Yeah, the tariffs like everything Trump has done and like everything Dutton will do, like everything Morrison did, have been botched. There's an argument for tariffs in terms of particular industries may need a little bit of protection for jobs or for keeping a product going or what have you. But we live in a globalized world. We live in a world of free trade agreements. We live in a world where if you're in the privileged West, you can buy just about anything you like from anywhere in the world, of legal things, of course. But if I want a particular car, say, and I've got the funds, I can get it. Now, there's downsides to globalization. Don't get me wrong. I'm not saying that it's the perfect thing and it's the best thing and hail, rock and roll, we're all living in a utopia. But its advantages are those of a better wealth, more peace. We've had less wars in the last 50 years than we've had in the entire period of the modern age from 1650. We haven't had no wars, but we've had less of them. That may be about to change, but I'm speaking as of today. We have had more prosperity. Wages have dropped significantly over the last 40 years thanks to neoconservatism. But the early stages of what I call hyper-globalization, before the neocons came in, we saw expansion of the middle class, people moving from the insecure working classes and the underpaid working classes into the middle class. These are generational changes, of course. We're now seeing change, and we don't have a working class, so it's interesting. We don't have the industrial working class that we used to have. Trump, of course, when said, prices of cars are going to go up, he's going to say, that's okay, I don't care, because people will buy American cars. But the American car industry has mostly moved offshore, and to bring it back into the United States will take a couple of generations, or maybe a generation, to rebuild the factories, rehire, retrain, get everything back up to a modern factory. A lot of your American cars are built in Indonesia and China and Korea and India. Now, that's fine, don't get me wrong. They're not bad cars by any standard, but they will attract tariffs. So his total lack of understanding of how the market works. And some of his claims too of, I think he said Indonesia was a 65% tariff. But in fact, there was no tariff as such. The 65% came from the difference in cost between what you paid in Indonesia as to what you paid in America by the time you got it all over there. Not actually tariffs, just the cost of doing business. For the world's greatest businessman, this was a shocking admission of he really doesn't know what's going on.
This is New Politics with Eddie Djokovic and David Lewis, the best podcast on Australian politics and news commentary. You can support us through Patreon and Substack, and also find us at newpolitics.com.au.
And the media keeps pushing that question of, are you better off than you were 3 years ago? And this is the message that they always push at the end of the first term of a Labor government, and it's also being pushed by the coalition. But what does it actually mean? And I guess they're framing all of this around cost of living issues, but my feeling is that someone's life doesn't just revolve around whether the price of bananas have gone up over the past 3 years or not. Quality of life and life happiness is based on so many different issues. And it will also get down to what the electorate feels about what the government is doing about all of these issues. So whether that's cost of living, inflation, housing, employment. If the electorate can see a pathway for improvement, I believe that the government will be rewarded. And I said that earlier on in this term, that even if those issues haven't been fully addressed by the time of the next election, that if the public can see the direction that the government is going in and are happy with that direction, even if we're not actually there yet, the government will be rewarded. And that's not going to be from everyone. Some people understand that change takes a little bit of time, and other people will want to see immediate results. But ultimately, it gets down to how well a government explains these issues to the public. So this whole idea about are you better off than 3 years ago, it's not a question with a yes-no answer, and it is a lot more complicated. Now, some people might feel that they are not better off than they were 3 years ago. using all those metrics, but will be satisfied with the progress that's being made. And that's always going to be the issue. Are they satisfied with that progress? And if they're not, do they look across the aisle and see if the people on the other side have got the solutions or not?
Yeah, and this is where really elections are won and lost. How well are we doing? I think the Reserve Bank, had we had a properly competent Reserve Bank, we'd have had interest rate cuts, and you might have had to put them up this time to try and slow the too much growth so that you don't get into a period of mega inflation. But of course, we've got a Reserve Bank that seems to have gone against all advice, and they have held interest rates, which was the best result I think we could have hoped for. I don't think they're going to cut because they'll now argue, oh, we can't cut during an election campaign. It might favour the government after seemingly, allegedly, favouring the coalition for all that time. But the government has had a hard job in improving stuff. We've said this before, and they've mostly done a pretty good job. Jim Chalmers had a big job. The indications are he's tackling it successfully. Maybe not everywhere, but it's certainly, the economy's in a much better position than it was when Scott Morrison lost office. I guess it will depend on people's patience, like you said.
So obviously the economy is the big issue that most people think about, but to me, this is probably what the whole election comes down to, or any election, I guess. And people might be happy with their lives, but unhappy with the Labor government, or conversely be unhappy with their lives but happy with the government. And the biggest question is whether they see the coalition as a viable option. And many of these economic factors that I assume the media would be talking about, this idea about being better off than 3 years ago, a lot of those issues are improving. Wages have gone up, inflation is down quite dramatically, interest rates have gone down just marginally, not much, but they still have gone down. Housing issues definitely haven't improved that much. The issue isn't as hot as it was 2 years ago, but it's still a big issue. There's energy rebates that have been put in place. There's extra funding for health, early education and childcare, school education. It's just a question of whether the electorate feels that enough has been done in all of these areas and whether the coalition could do any better. I don't think that they actually could, but David, I'm just the one vote out there.
I've been saying since the last election that Peter Dutton cannot form government this election, and I stand by that. No one can show me which 20 seats or 22 seats, I can never remember the correct number, to get government in the Liberal Party's own right. Seats like Kooyong, seats like Wentworth, those harbour seats in Sydney, there's no Liberal member with inside of Sydney Harbour. They're gone and they're not coming back. Zali Steggall isn't going anywhere. Allegra Spender, I don't think, isn't going anywhere. Zoe Daniel isn't going anywhere. I won't go through all of them, but they're not going anywhere. They've fulfilled the first rule of politics in that all politics is local, and they've all been really good local members. We can disagree, we can argue with them all up and down the street, but when it came to defending their local communities, they were great, and they should be rewarded. Now, Peter Dutton, till Cyclone Alfred, I did think he might gain 4 to 8 seats if they did extremely well. But there were sort of 4 seats, mostly in Sydney and Melbourne's West, that they might have won back from the Labor Party. I'm not sure now after Cyclone Alfred and after the lacklustre election campaign, etc., that he can do that. But that was nowhere near enough to get government or even negotiate for a minority government.
Well, it's only the first week of the campaign and they still will keep trying and keep going. Of course they will. There's no question about that. But one other issue that did arise during the week was gas and energy prices, and the coalition keeps putting out this message that people are paying $1,300 more in energy bills. And again, no one knows where this figure has come from unless they looked at 2 or 3 households in different states that ran 6 vacuum cleaners at the same time or left on every light in the house for the full year or had the aircon on forever. And in typical coalition style, they grab these small bits of data, extrapolate this data and then apply it to everyone. And a lot of people that I know, David, like generally I don't talk about electricity bills because it's quite a boring subject, to be honest. But the people that do talk about electricity bills, all of them have said that they've actually come down quite substantially, and some are actually in credit. And this is because there's been a lot of rebates that have been introduced. Now, for the coalition, there might be an argument that they could raise that the actual cost of energy might have gone up by $1,300, but this has actually been mitigated by these government rebates. Now, that's an argument that has got some legs, but that's not what the coalition is saying. Here's a conversation between Jason Clare and Susan Ley on the Sunrise program.
$1,300. That's how much more people are paying for their electricity.
Jason, she's right. People's power bills have gone up that much, and this is a major concern for people. Why didn't you do this years ago, Jason?
Well, the interesting thing about this is that the Liberal Party and Peter Dutton promised to do this 5 years ago, and they never did it. So this is a con. The fact is that we've been able to secure 6 times as much gas as Peter Dutton was talking about reserving last night. What this is, let's be honest about it, this is a distraction from his nuclear reactor policy, which is about as popular now as a fart in an elevator.
Now, David, I've not had that experience of someone letting off a bit of steam in an elevator, but I can imagine that it wouldn't be a very pleasant experience. But
we haven't got a live together yet.
Well, we'll see how we go with that. But,
That's right.
But I think that with this whole gas, energy, nuclear discussion, it's starting to get into a rabbit hole type of discussion with all of these issues, the supply of energy. And the coalition has been talking about introducing a national gas reserve similar to the system that exists in Western Australia. And if they think that it's a good idea now, well, why did they not introduce it during the 9 years that they were in government? I can tell you one reason: it doesn't suit their donors from the resources industry, but let's not go there. But they have been talking about reducing the cost of gas from $14 per petajoule of gas down to $12 per petajoule. Now, David, I don't even know what a petajoule is. I assume that it's some sort of measurement issue. But I think that once you're getting into the details and discussions about petajoules, you've probably already lost your audience.
It's...
Well, I think as soon as I mentioned petajoule, people switched off.
Yeah, it's some unfathomable number, kilo, mega, and on it goes. I'm forgetting what they are. I'm not a mathematician, and hello to all our mathematicians. Please tell us what they are. A petajoule is probably something like a trillion. And I think we're getting into numbers where there's not enough gas in the world to generate this type of stuff, but it sounds good. They never learn that if you're going to deal in technical stuff, you've got to be across the technical details and understand thoroughly the technical details. And if you don't understand thoroughly the technical details, you very quickly look like someone who doesn't know what they're talking about. And those that do know what they're talking about let the people who don't know, and that affects your vote. So it might sound very knowledgeable to talk about this stuff, but unless you know what you're talking about, you'll be shot down very quickly.
This is New Politics, available through Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Amazon Audible and YouTube, and also available to support at Patreon, Substack, and at our website, newpolitics.com.au.
In the seat of Dickson, Peter Dutton is facing a few challenges. Ellie Smith is a Climate 200-backed community independent and is one of those candidates that can either win the seat or exert influence. And this might make the contest in Dickson a genuine three-way contest. And in the same way that Josh Frydenberg had to focus on trying to win the seat of Kooyong in 2022, this is a situation that is going to be a distraction for Peter Dutton. He'll need to campaign federally and locally as well, and there's only a certain amount of hours during the day to do all of this. I caught up with Ellie Smith during the week and had a chat about all of these issues in the seat of Dickson. Ellie Smith, thanks for joining us on New Politics today.
Thank you.
Now, you are running in the seat of Dickson. That's a seat that's been held by Peter Dutton for 24 years. He's also the leader of the Liberal Party and the leader of the opposition. So it's going to be a difficult seat to win. It is a very marginal seat at the moment, but we've found that over the past 24 years, Peter Dutton always seems to find a way to win the seat. Now, you've mentioned before that it doesn't make sense for the community to have a representative who is so divisive. Is that one of the reasons for running in this election, or are there some other reasons as well?
Yes, there are a number of reasons that I decided to run, but the main one is that I didn't feel represented by our local member, and I knew that there were a lot of people in our local community who also didn't, and we have been really inspired by the independents that have sprung up out of communities across the country, and thought, well, we could do that too. We could give it a go.
You do have a background in environmental management, and you've worked with farming communities, conservationists and environmental organisations over the past decade or so. Is the environment the main focus of the issues that you'll be pushing during the election campaign? And remembering that you have been backed by the Climate 200 group, is that the main issue, or will you be looking at some other issues that directly relate to the community as well?
I think it's really important as a community-backed independent to be listening to what the community is asking for, and that's really my approach to the way that I'm running this campaign and the way that I would act when I'm in Parliament. We have undertaken surveys, and while environment is a big concern for a lot of people in our local community, there are a lot of pressing issues that are affecting people locally that really need to be dealt with. And my campaign has very much been focused on those issues that are, the difference between having a good life and really struggling. So things like transport and traffic have come up a lot in the local community, and that's not just about public transport, but about the infrastructure spend in this local community, and having an advocate who's making sure that both state and local councils, as well as the federal government, is investing properly in our area. Cost of living is affecting everybody, and the supermarkets really we've seen this in the last couple of weeks, that they're the most profitable in the country, and the power that they have over the major parties is very evident in the fact that there hasn't been action taken until now.
And what are some of the other issues? Like, are you looking at health and education as well?
Absolutely. So we have a broad range of policies that are based on the listening that we've done with the community. And for me, health is a very personal issue. I've had health issues in the past, and thankfully they're behind me now, but I have had an experience with the healthcare system that I understand the need for better access to allied health, better access to GPs, but also how difficult it is to travel to hospital when it's quite far away.
So do you feel that the community has been a little bit left behind or neglected over the past 24 years?
I think our community we've had a representative who has been focused on the party and his career. He's done the job of a local member, but a lot of people don't feel that he's representing them very well. And so there's a real groundswell of support for the idea of an independent. I think there's a good reason that in this electorate, even though it's quite marginal, Labor has never got across the line here. And it's because we are a community, and various communities across the electorate, who have lots of different ideas, and the major parties don't speak to us. So having a community-backed independent who is taking it up to the major parties, both of them, and will represent our local community, is very appealing to a broad cross-section of the community.
And it looks like there'll be maybe around 6 or 7 candidates in the seat of Dickson. Now, nominations haven't closed, but I think it's around 6 or 7 at the moment. And this is the first time that you will be running as a candidate in the seat. And as a community independent candidate, you'll be looking to attract votes from the people who previously would have voted for the Liberal National Party in Queensland, or the Labor Party, or Australian Greens, or One Nation. So all of these many other people that they would have voted for in the past. So why should people vote for an independent in this seat, and what could you offer that the others don't at the moment?
Yes, you're right. We are trying to attract voters that have voted in all of those parties in the past, but the overwhelming sense is that people vote from the bottom up. Basically, they go, oh, who's the least worst at the top, and then go down from there. And what we're trying to do is give people an alternative that they can take off the colours that they would have otherwise put on and just say, we're going to vote local, and we're going to vote for somebody who is going to listen and represent our best interests in Parliament. And so we are having great conversations, outdoor knocking, out flyering with people who have literally voted for every one of those parties that you mentioned, but are interested in the idea of voting for an independent. And that's what is so exciting about this campaign and about community independence in general. They really cut across this idea of the parties and the politicians that represent a party first and then the community second. And so it's quite exciting when you go out and talk to people of all walks of life who will vote for an independent.
So making that shift from the least worst candidate to the best candidate. That's something that we should all aspire towards.
I hope so.
And I guess some of this relates to that push from the mainstream media that we've been hearing quite a lot about over the past couple of months, and of course from the established political parties, that votes going away from the major parties and anything that could result in a minority government. And for me, that would be one of the likely results if the next election ends up with a large number of independents and minor parties sitting on the crossbench, that this would somehow be inherently bad for the democratic process and create a lot of instability. And I'm assuming that you, as a community independent candidate, you would disagree with this sentiment. But why do you think there is this prevailing attitude that keeps being pushed through by the media that somehow a minority government or having too many independents on the crossbench would be bad for the democratic process?
I think it's very much being pushed by the major parties who don't want to lose control of the parliament and don't want to lose control of power in general. So that's where that sentiment is coming from. But we've had a number of minority governments in living memory, and they haven't been characterised by chaos. They have been quite productive, some of the most productive parliaments that we've seen. And we've had quite a large crossbench in the last parliament. And while they weren't in the balance of power, they were able to make changes by speaking out about issues that the major parties found uncomfortable or didn't want to talk about. And they've been able to make changes like really pushing for the indexation of HECS debt to come back in line with expectations rather than it was out of control, basically. And while then the government brought that in, it was really a campaign by Monique Ryan in her seat, because she has so many students in her seat, that got that through. And for me, my community is made up of a lot of health workers, contractors, subcontractors, small businesses, and those are the communities that I'll be listening to and seeing how I can move the dial on issues that will really help them in their lives and in their businesses.
Now, onto the campaign itself. You were announced as a community independent backed by the Climate 200 group in January this year. And that was just a few months ago, it wasn't that long ago. But what are some of the key factors that you're picking up or you have been picking up while you've been campaigning? Are the people worried about the future? Are they happy with their current local member? Are they unhappy with the political system? Are there cost of living issues, health, education? What are the issues that you've been picking up from speaking to the people on the ground in the seat of Dickson over the past few months?
The big issues are around cost of living, and that is broad reaching, whether it is transport, housing, cost of electricity, cost of supermarket groceries. It's affecting people's lives every day. Insurance is another one. So that is the biggest issue, but it is a number of issues and it needs to be tackled in lots of different ways in our community. And I think that there's lots of opportunities for the Parliament to make changes that make people's lives easier and better without having to wait for interest rate cuts from the RBA. And those are the issues that I'll focus on because they're the issues that are very present for people in the electorate. And a lot of people who are okay, they've got their house, they might be self-funded retirees and they can afford the groceries, are seeing that their kids or others in the community are really struggling, and they want to see the settings actually work for the vast majority in our community rather than just saying, oh, well, I'm okay, so everybody must be okay. There's that real compassion, especially around the housing situation where young people aren't able to get into housing. They can't even get into a rental. And so there's a lot of compassion, whether it's somebody who's affected by it themselves or otherwise. But I did want to just come back to the point about being backed by Climate 200 when I was announced. So our community has built a movement from the ground up over the last 12 months to take it up to the major parties in a way that we are competitive on people power and volunteers, and we have the backing of the local community. And that's really the precondition for support from Climate 200. So they don't come in and say you should do this. They certainly didn't encourage us. It was the fact that we built the movement and then they came in behind us and have provided some funding for the campaign because we had built that momentum and it was very clear that our community wanted an independent.
And I guess part of that is this sense that people want to see politics done differently in Australia. And I guess Climate 200 is part of that process as well. And the feedback that we get from a lot of people on the New Politics podcast is that the two-party political system is not providing the solutions that people are after. And that's both from a progressive side and also from a conservative perspective as well. And just this point that it just seems to be so difficult to achieve a consensus on pretty much anything within the political process. And I guess the people in the community, they do want a change without necessarily being able to articulate what that change should be or what that change could look like. Is that something that you're picking up as well in the community?
Absolutely. I talk to people when I go door knocking and they say, oh, no, I don't have any issues. I'm not really interested in politics. But then when you kind of dig into that and ask what they're interested in and what things affect them, there's this deep sense that politics isn't for them and that they have been ignored and their issues don't matter. And the fact that I'm there at their door or I'm at the PNC or I'm at the train station, they're ready to talk to them is a revelation. So they're saying, okay, all right, well, if you're an independent that is focused on our local issues, then maybe I can get engaged and be excited about this for the first time.
Now, you also had a cyclone come through Brisbane just a few weeks ago, and it's a difficult seat to win even at the best of times, and then you end up having a cyclone to deal with on top of everything else. And, of course, during these sorts of times, politics just always has to be put aside. It always has to be the community first, and then you see how everything else falls into place. But what were some of your observations during this time, both from a community perspective and from a political perspective?
What was great, if you can say that there was anything great about the storm, was that it became evident that the community that we've built around this campaign is more than just about the campaign. The volunteers really wanted to get in and do something for the community and give back and make sure that their neighbours were okay and that the broader community was okay. And a lot of us were affected for quite a number of days by the cyclone. And so it was quite a challenge while we were looking after our own backyard to then also see what we could do more broadly. But we partnered with a number of businesses and community groups who were doing things anyway, but we had the people power and they had the know-how and the connections and have been working for a long time with more vulnerable people in the community. And that was just a great experience to be able to say, well, actually we have 40 or 50 volunteers who are available to help out. And we had this great connection with a community member who had saved a whole lot of frozen food when one of the supermarkets, their power went out. And so we were able to distribute food to the community, and it was an amazing way to be able to give back. And then once the cyclone was over, we had a number of new volunteers who came in who said, they knew that their neighbour had their freezer filled with vegetables and pies and things, and it was just a great way to build up the community and the campaign as well. But what was quite disappointing and evident was the fact that our local member wasn't here, and he may have been here during the storm, but he wasn't out in the community. And I think that that's a real challenge for our local community, is not having a representative who's really focused on our local area.
And is that something that's been picked up, or that you've picked up during your time with the electorate at the moment?
Definitely. Yeah, I think there's lots of people who are noticing the absence.
So, Ellie, I realise that most people in politics do like to deal with reality rather than hypotheticals, and you're a candidate at this stage and not actually a member of Parliament, so we can theorise just a little bit. But after the election, the Labor Party and the Liberal National Coalition end up with the same number of seats. And remembering that if you do win the seat of Dickson, Peter Dutton is not going to be one of the people that you're negotiating with. If you were a member of the crossbench representing the people of Dickson, well, what are you going to do? And, I know that you're probably not going to tell me right now who you would support, because there's so many factors that do need to be taken into account. First of all, the big issue is that you'd have to win the seat first. But what are some of the considerations that you would have to take into account when deciding who to support in government?
I think that the crossbenches of the past in situations like this have taught us a lot about what to do in a situation where it is a hung parliament. And I really have listened to the advice of Andrew Wilkie when he's written about his experience in the Gillard years, where he basically signed away his ability to negotiate on legislation piece by piece because he really wanted gambling reform, and he didn't even end up getting that because of the Gillard government deciding at the last minute that they wouldn't make good on their promise. So I'm very aware of that history, and I am also aware that there would be potentially quite a lot of power being on the crossbench, and I wouldn't use that lightly. I would work for our community, whether it's with the government or the opposition, on good policy that will make the difference for our local community. And Dickson, I often say, is a bit of a microcosm of Australia. We have rural areas, we have urban areas, richer areas, poorer areas. So there are a lot of things that, if it's good for Dickson, it's good for Australia. My focus would be about how are we going to move the dial on issues that are affecting people all across Australia as well. And I think that I can work with either party to get those things done.
Ellie Smith, Community Independent Candidate for Dickson, thanks for discussing all of these issues. I think it's been a very good discussion. Thanks a lot for your time today, and good luck with your campaign.
Thank you very much.
So, David, the independent candidates and smaller parties will be very important during this election campaign, and I think that their influence will be twofold, either by winning more seats off the major parties or by influencing the results in the seats with their preference flows. And at the moment, the crossbench is the largest that it's ever been in Australia's history. It was 19 before the election was called, and one of those seats was held by Kylie Tink in North Sydney. That's been lost in a redistribution, but it's still likely to be a large crossbench, irrespective of what happens in the election. It might go up, it might go down, but I think it's still going to be quite large. And the vote for independents and smaller parties is likely to go up. Now, back in 1975, the primary vote for the major parties was almost at 96%, and that slowly decreased to 85% at the 2007 election. That was 18 years ago. And now it's actually down to 68% for the major parties, and it's likely to go down even further at this upcoming election. So the lower the primary vote goes down for the major parties, the more unpredictable the final result will be. And there's a reason why the primary vote for the major parties is decreasing, and decreasing substantially, and that's because the electorate is generally dissatisfied with the major parties. Now, 68% of the electorate is still voting for the major parties, but 32% of the electorate are voting for someone else, and that's quite a substantial number. So I think the independent candidates will be playing a big part in this election. We're not exactly sure how much, but it is going to be substantial.
We are heading towards the end of the old system of parties that were set up basically in the Industrial Revolution and whose basic philosophies are based around pre-World War One or pre-World War II, let's stretch it out, philosophy. Now, I know that they adjust in the late 70s and the 1980s, but now that's 50 years ago. So they're still really working on outdated systems. Whether both parties are agile enough to reform and meet the current challenges, or whether they have to be, and this includes really the Greens and the other parties too, whether though they're agile enough to keep up and reform themselves in a way that is, which doesn't betray their background, but moves into the future. And that's a big challenge, and it might not be able to be done. I wouldn't say to either party, oh, you failed because you couldn't adapt to the times. The times have changed in ways that are totally different to what everybody expected. And the structures of things have changed and what people expect. Having broadly local, mass-based parties with philosophies that are at best 50 years old and which didn't work in terms of neocon liberals and things, or didn't work for long, is a challenge.
And I guess the point is that we are getting more people like Ellie Smith running for Parliament as well, and we're getting a lot more people like Ellie Smith, and whereas 50 years ago that would not have been a consideration.
Yeah, I think the move towards independence is showing a dissatisfaction with party people. Now, of course, there are brilliant people in the parties who are committed, who are great, who do the work, but there's a lot of machine people. The latest lament is about the career politician. And when you think about it, if we go to British politics for a second, Gladstone was in Parliament for 60 years. We've always had them. I guess there's a sense in which people are sick of number crunchers and what they see as the faceless nobodies. And we could point to various figures who are in Parliament at the moment, and I'm not going to name anybody. You all know who they are.
I don't mind if someone's in Parliament for 50 years as long as they're a good local representative.
Exactly, and productive. And George Pearce, who was admired by both sides of Parliament because he'd served on both sides of Parliament, but considered one of the better senators we ever had. And he was in Parliament for 40 years or something, and he started in the Labor Party and went across to the non-Labor parties after the split in the 20s. Again, it's not the career, it's how you spend that career. There are plenty of people you could point to who are seat warmers or who have achieved nothing except stop things happening, who have no positive achievements. And that's the type of thing that we've got to fight. And the parties allow for that because the parties rely on numbers in the House or in both houses. And so to have seat warmers actually, ironically, I guess, or counterintuitively, works towards maintaining the system. But the system itself is crying for change. Hence, we're getting these independents, but most of whom have been really positive and have changed things for the better, if only in their electorates.
And the opinion polls are now being released at a rapid rate, and there were 4 opinion polls released during the week. There was one from Roy Morgan, Essential Poll, Resolve and Freshwater, and although all of their figures are slightly different, they are all confirming that drift away from the coalition that we've been talking about over the past few weeks. The only opinion poll that is favourable to the coalition is the Freshwater poll, and that's at 51% for the coalition and 49% for the Labor Party and two-party preferred voting. But even still, that one is a drift away from their previous polls from over the past few months as well. And as we get closer to the day of the election, or the election period, which starts with pre-polling on April the 22nd, just after the Easter break, these numbers will become more relevant and more meaningful. And we can have all of those cliches about the only poll that matters is the poll on election day. And David, of course, that cliche is absolutely correct, but these numbers are not looking very good for the coalition at the moment.
No, and I've said before, most pollsters actually try and be accurate because it's not within their business interests to be inaccurate. Some skew a bit right, some skew a bit to the centre, some skew a bit to the left. But when you aggregate them all together, which is really the only way to look at what the polls are doing. I know the press likes, there's one outlier poll that says Dutton is ahead 20%. Then another one comes out showing that he's behind 22%, and it turns out, he's behind 2%, which is about what it is. So you've got to aggregate everything. It's not looking good. And it was never looking good. His best hope was to gain some seats. My earlier figure of 4 to 6 might have saved his political career. He's going to have a big ask to be able to maintain his job tomorrow if the election was held today. And as you said, there's still 3 weeks to go, and anything can happen.
Oh, well, that's the end of the first week of the campaign. And for me, the coalition is still appearing a lot like the amateur hour. It still seems very unprepared, and Peter Dutton is going to all of those traditional right-wing Liberal Party tropes about China, everything is woke, attacks on education, cut this, cut that. My feeling is that the electorate is still looking for something that is far more positive, and Peter Dutton just seems to be appearing more like a walking cadaver. And one interesting thing that I noticed on Sky News, and they are Conservative propaganda central, they will promote the coalition in every single way possible. But during the week, they went out onto the streets of Melbourne to do these vox pops of people's attitudes to the political leaders.
What do you think about Anthony Albanese at the moment?
Well, I think myself that he's doing a good job compared to what happened before.
Peter Dutton, do you think about him? What do you think of him?
He's not that popular. Yeah. I don't think he will do good.
What do you think of the leaders at the moment? Anthony Albanese, what do you think of him?
Oh, he's not too bad.
What do you think of Anthony Albanese?
It's okay.
Yeah. Peter Dutton?
No.
Okay.
So for me, that was a bit of a surprise, because normally Sky News would go out and find people who say positive things about Peter Dutton and then edit out anything positive that they might have said about Anthony Albanese. And on this occasion, they chose not to. I don't know why, but that was an interesting observation. But everything that's happened this week is pretty much based on what we said last week, that Labor's just seemed very ready for the campaign. And of course they would, because they knew exactly when the election was going to be called and the election date itself. And they seemed buoyed up by the opportunity to discuss all of their ideas to the electorate, whereas the coalition just, to me, still looks the opposite, where they seem to have forgotten that there was an election just around the corner. But it's only week one. Maybe the coalition just needed this week to warm up, but you just cannot take forever to get ready during an election campaign. You just have to be on top of these things right now.
It was not a surprise. He had to call it by May 17. And after January, you know that it's going to be called any week. So their lack of preparation, and again, maybe they're mimicking the Trump by having this lackluster campaign that seems to be failing. Meanwhile, things are happening in the background that shows that Trump wins. Easier to do that in the States than it is here. We have compulsory voting. We have paper ballots. We have...
No Chads in Australia.
No Chads in Australia. Nothing hangs. It all gets counted, it all gets accounted for, and if something goes missing, it's a big deal. Tony Abbott tried to change it by putting in his mate at the Electoral Commission, and he found he couldn't change it, that the Electoral Commission staff were too proud of their work to make unreasonable and essentially illegal changes. I'm going to reiterate, anything can happen, but they didn't hit the ground running. And in fact, it's a reverse. I was thinking maybe the Labor Party learnt from the Voice to Parliament referendum, in that the no side got organised really, really quickly, caught them off guard in a sense, and they lost the momentum and then hence lost that referendum, which should have been won for many, many reasons. Maybe Labor actually did learn, or we will capitalise, we will be ready, and they won't. The Liberal Party's lack of preparation for an election they knew was coming has been head-scratchingly bizarre.
That's it for this episode of New Politics. Thanks for listening in. And if you'd like to support our style of journalism and commentary, please make a donation at our website at newpolitics.com.au. We don't beg, plead, beseech or gaslight you about journalism coming to an end. We just keep it very simple. If you like what we do, please send some support our way. It keeps our commitment to independent journalism ticking along. I'm Eddie Djokovic. Thanks for listening in, and it's goodbye to our listeners.
I'm David Lewis. We'll see you next time.